Mantiqueira Mountains, southeastern Brazil, 1888. They said the cold weather was coming gradually, but when he came, he didn't warn us. That year, the wind changed ahead of schedule. By August, frost was already burning the grass in the highest areas, and in September the mornings dawned white. High in the Serra da Mantiqueira Mountains, the air became drier, the days shorter, and the village entered its usual ritual, stockpiling firewood, sealing cracks, protecting corrals, reinforcing thatched roofs. Everyone did the same thing. Everyone, except one. Antonio Figueira arrived at the end of autumn. He didn't talk much. He didn't ask any questions. I wasn't asking for an opinion. He brought with him only a worn chest, an axe too sharp for someone who seemed simple, and a look that suggested he observed the sky more than people. While the residents were marking out the traditional rectangular shapes of their houses on the ground, Antonio drew something strange, a long construction, low, too stretched out for that sloping terrain. At first it was just curiosity, but when he started lifting beams that were too thick, when it became clear that the animal shelter would be attached to the family's home, the comments started. Is that guy going to sleep with the cattle? Did it turn into an animal? Do you think this place is a cave? They laughed. Antonio did not answer. He continued working. In the mountains there were unwritten rules. Home is home. A corral is a corral. Mixing the two was something only a wretch would do, or of someone who had lost their mind. And that work seemed wrong in every way. Too long, too heavy, too low. Even so, day after day, Antonio moved forward, without haste. While the others rushed to finish before the first cold front, he stopped to adjust joints, seal gaps with thick clay, and position each opening so that the wind passed over it, never directly. He knew something, and he didn't say so. When winter began to show clear signs, almost all the houses were already ready. Chimneys belched smoke, fences marked off plots of land, and the smell of dry hay filled the air. Les Ali. Antonio's construction still seemed unfinished. It wasn't a house. It wasn't a corral. It was a mistake. In the middle of the village. Some showed up feigning curiosity, only to spread stories later. He cooks where the oxen sleep. His wife wouldn't last even a month. The hay is on top of the room. He's going to suffocate. The words didn't affect him directly, but they hurt in other ways. At the warehouse, he was served last. At the sale, his mug remained empty longer than the others. The children were forbidden from playing near that crooked house. One day he asked for help to lift a fallen beam. The response he heard was, "We help those who build properly." That was the only time he stopped. He looked at the men stacking sacks of corn. I said nothing. He returned alone. He pushed the trunk with his shoulder, step by step. Meanwhile, construction continued at a brisk pace. He dug with his hands where the ground was too hard. He reinforced the walls with stones from the inside, anticipating the weight that was yet to come. That was a mistake. A beam collapsed on the second roof. He spent 3 days rebuilding, without rest. He redid everything with deeper joints. The cold was intensifying, and the work never ended. He'll die before he even lives there. But the work never stopped. October brought strange winds, too cold too early, too much silence. The leaves did not fall. They broke. At dawn, the ground would be as hard as stone. The smoke rising from the houses was no longer a sign of preparation. It was a sign of survival. The muleteers began to descend the mountain in haste. Some abandoned animals in the higher areas. It was as if winter was testing the waters, waiting for someone to falter. The houses were closed. Leather on the doors, cloths on the windows, ashes on the floor to prevent slipping. And Antonio, I was still working outside. It reinforced the back wall, curved, facing against the biting wind. He buried the supports deeper. He covered the roof with layers of thatch, clay, and compacted earth. The neighbors were watching. They laughed less, but they still laughed. He built all this just to die because of a roof. He must already be sleeping with the oxen. At the end of October, the first major frost arrived. Too strong, Out of season. It lasted 2 days. The fences disappeared. Branches cracked like dry bones. The trails have disappeared. On the third day, absolute silence. When the doors opened, many noticed the same thing. Antonio's house was still standing, covered in white. No smoke. It froze. Or he ran away in the middle of the night. Nobody went to see. 2 days later the smoke appeared. Weak. Constant. He was alive. But what was inside that house? Inside, Antonio was living exactly as he had planned. The oxen slept behind a thick mud wall. The heat rose, passed through the hay stored above, and warmed the front rooms. The firewood remained dry. The water did not freeze. The tools worked, but nobody knew. All they saw was a roof that was too low, and few windows. And they continued judging. The worst is yet to come. The long winter is coming now. November plunged the mountains into a constant twilight. The sun appeared for only a few hours. Inside the houses, the cold seeped in through the cracks. The firewood ran out quickly, and the problem grew. The cattle, kept in separate pens, needed to be fed every day, in wind, in ice, at risk. Every trip to the corral turned into a battle. Frozen doors, injured feet, exhausted bodies. The first collapses came quickly. A man fell and twisted his ankle while carrying water. Another fell ill after nights clearing a path through the frost. A child burned their feet trying to help without boots. And Antonio? It hasn't been seen since the first frost. Only its chimney continued to emit smoke. Regular, silent, like a clock. At least his cattle don't freeze. If they're still alive. He probably died in there. Nobody knows. The village's first corral collapsed at the end of December. The weight of the frost overcame the roof. 3 oxen died that morning. And the silence that enveloped the village, it was no longer contempt. It was a matter of doubt. Antonio Figueira's house, still covered by a white crust of frost, remained intact. No sign of movement, no creaking, no cracks. But she wouldn't give in. January began with a dry sound. It wasn't the wind. It wasn't thunder. It was a beam that broke. One of the oldest houses in the village, built during the time of the first settlers, collapsed under the accumulated weight of the cold. The frost kept accumulating day after day without pause. And now, in addition to keeping the livestock alive, residents had to climb onto the rooftops to try to lighten the load. With shovels. With planks. Scared. It was on one of these climbs that everything almost ended in tragedy. Pedro, a 13-year-old boy, went up with his father before the sun came up. They were trying to clean the roof of the corral before the cold made everything more rigid. With one wrong step, the boy slipped. He slid down the side slope and became trapped between a wall of hard ice and the corral structure. The father shouted. He called for help. Neighbors ran. They tried to pull. Nothing. The top layer of ice began to slide. If he gave in, he would bury the boy. That's when the silence was broken. Antonio appeared. Without shouting. Without running. He carried a narrow shovel in one hand and a rope crossed over his chest. Nobody saw him coming. He didn't ask for an explanation. He didn't waste any time. He knelt down, tied the rope to one of the corral posts, planted his feet firmly, and began to dig. Not forcefully. With precision. He knew exactly where to hit to break it, without causing it to slide. Within minutes, a narrow channel opened up. He reached in, grabbed the boy by the shoulders and pulled him. He handed the boy over to his father. The man tried to speak, to thank, to cry. Antonio simply nodded. He turned around. He descended the trail slowly. He entered the long building. The frost erased his footprints almost immediately. Those who laughed now need to rethink. In the village, the conversation wasn't about the rescue. It was about him. He was dry. The coat looked like it had just been pulled from a fire. He didn't look like someone who had been stuck in the cold for weeks. And the question began to circulate, even without being spoken aloud. What's inside that house? That night something changed. A small group of men went to the edge of Antonio's fence. They didn't hit each other. They didn't call. They stayed there, observing the thick roof, the constant chimney, the door turned against the wind. Then they returned, with something different in their gaze. It wasn't envy, not even afraid. It was uncertain. February arrived as punishment. The frost wouldn't melt. She was renewing herself. Each new layer buried the hope of the previous one. 2 corrals had already collapsed. Families lost all their hay. The milk froze inside the buckets before it even reached the kitchens. The houses began to fail from the inside. The wood was swelling. The mud was coming loose. The windows were jammed. And then someone realized Antonio's house was still habitable, not as warm as a luxurious shelter, but firm, stable. A neighbor who was passing by, carrying salt for his father, smelled it. The air around the door didn't burn my nose. There was heat, discreetly escaping through the upper cracks. Without realizing it, he stopped. He stood there for a few seconds, as if, just by being close, the cold hurt less. The house has become a landmark, even if no one would admit it. In the following days, something curious happened. Men began reinforcing their own homes using techniques they had ridiculed months before. Clay mixed with straw in the cracks. Diagonal piles buried deeper extra layers of hay on the roofs. No one said where the idea came from, but everyone knew. What was once contempt, it became an imitation. Then, on a particularly cold morning, the unthinkable happened. Seu Augusto, the old man who had mocked him the most at the beginning, appeared at Antonio's door. He was carrying a sack of grain. She was trembling. He spoke little. "The chickens are dying. I just need a dry corner." Antonio opened the door. He let them in. No questions asked. No charge. The old man simply nodded, embarrassed. He leaned against the wall, and it stayed that way. After him, others began to appear. They didn't ask. They didn't match. They were just passing by more slowly. They left a gesture, a piece of cut firewood, a loaf of bread, a respectful silence, and they left. The house that wouldn't last a winter. It was now the only point of equilibrium in the mountain range. At the end of March, the frost began to subside. It didn't melt all at once. It slowly fell apart, as if accepting defeat. The trails reappeared. The birds have returned, and the village saw itself reflected in the mirror. Corrals destroyed, patchwork houses, cake fences, one less. The long building, darkened by winter, remained intact. The door still opened effortlessly. The roof, intact. Inside, the smell of dry hay, heated metal, life preserved. Antonio left on the first day of real sunshine. He trimmed the branches of a tree next to the house. Then he cut a new beam. No rush, as if nothing had happened. The following week, men from the village gathered to rebuild a corral. One of them, the same one who had refused to help in the past, approached. He held out an axe. He didn't ask for anything. Antonio picked up the tool, and so it was. He worked all day. He returned before dark. There was never an apology. There was never a tribute. He didn't need to. But the following summer, 3 new houses have begun to appear in the mountains. Long, lows, heavy, with animal shelter linked to family life. Nobody said they were copying, but everyone knew. What seemed like madness, it was preparation. If this story touched you in any way, consider subscribing to the channel. Here, we tell the stories of those who saw before, and that's why he survived. Leave a like. Share with those who understand the value of silence. And that's all for now. The next story, it's already waiting for you.